Good morning, afternoon, and evening to wherever you're calling from. So glad that you're here. We have an exciting session ahead today. We'll just wait one more minute for folks to join in and then we can get started. There are still people trickling in from the waiting room, so we'll be there in a moment. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited to be here today. Just as I get started, I want to first wish a good morning, afternoon, and evening to anyone who is joining us on this call. My name's Natasha Westheimer. I am the co-coordinator of the Climate and Environment Charter Secretariat, and I'm joined by my co-lead Nishani Jaimaha, who is also facilitating this call. And we're so excited to be co-convening today's webinar with the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, REAP, and the Anticipation Hub. We have an exciting set of speakers and practitioners, and we'll move on to some housekeeping before I get started. First and foremost, this is a Zoom meeting, and we ask that participants join the call on mute, and we'll have some time for Q&A later in the session. But we would really love to be able to hear our speakers. Um, and the webinar will be in English, but we do have live translated captions. So to see these, you can select closed captions or CC. It's on the Zoom menu bar at the bottom of your screen, and you can choose your preferred caption language, which is also a kind reminder to our speakers that English may not be the first language of all participants. So we ask that you can speak slow and clearly so that we can hope that transcript catches up. We'll be recording this event and it will be uploaded on the Charter event page. And we'll have some time for Q&A for all participants. So you're welcome to share your questions in the chat box. If you have a specific question for a speaker, please do indicate who. And we also invite you to use the chat to introduce yourselves to those on the call. And once again, we're really pleased to be having this webinar. Welcome again for those that have just joined. And on behalf of the Charter Secretariat, it's really a pleasure to bring together such a strong group of practitioners and partners and charter signatories for the session. Just some framing before we get started. The Charter, the Climate and Environment Charter, asks all of us as humanitarian organizations to do our part in addressing the climate and environmental emergency, to reduce risks, to anticipate crises, to act early, and to ensure the sustainability of our work. These are embedded in the Charter commitments, and particularly for this webinar and this theme, commitments 1 and 4 of the Charter. And as many of you know very well, it's increasingly urgent to consider how we can work towards these commitments, given the scale, given the frequency of the climate and environmental shocks that are affecting the communities that we serve. The good news is that many of the organizations in this room are already on a journey towards doing that. We have early warning and early action approaches and anticipatory action frameworks that are being used by many organizations around the world to try to get ahead of crises rather than just responding to them. And we also know that many organizations are still asking some of the foundational questions. Where do we start? What tools exist? How do we access funding to do this work? And that's exactly what today's webinar is designed to address. We worked with experts and colleagues from REAP and the Anticipation Hub to try to put together a webinar that can offer some practical experience, some concrete resources, and lessons learned for that. And we hope this is a two-way conversation. One of the outputs that we're hoping for from the session is also a clearer picture of some of the challenges and support needs across the humanitarian sector so that we can bring these insights into some of the global platforms on these topics. And we'll come back to that later in the session. We are joined by an incredible group of speakers today. And the session is organized into a few different sections. So Catalina from the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership and Karen Dahl from the Anticipation Hub will be offering some framing. And then we have a number of speakers that Nishani will facilitate a panel conversation with around their experiences on the ground implementing early warning, early action, anticipatory action to support in communities' response and getting ahead of disasters. Issam from Mile Organizations, Mark from Resurgence, and Esra from Daraja, and Chance from the Malawi Red Cross. And then the third section of today's webinar will be on resources and financing. I'll give us a bit of an intro to the technical resources, tools, expertise that's out there to support in implementing early warning, early action, anticipatory action. And then Maria from Cruise and David and Tariro from the START Network will we'll talk about some of the financing mechanisms and opportunities that exist. And with that, I'm pleased to hand over the floor to Catalina to offer some framing from REAP.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And thanks, Nishani, for setting up this webinar. Like when you reach out and said, okay, let's do this webinar, I think we thought this is a really good moment because I feel that is a part of a celebration that we need to do of all the progress that had happened, but it's also a reality check. So I think the invitation for all of us here is to think through all these presentations. Okay, what is next? Like accepting that we have evolved a lot, but also recognizing there is a lot to do. So, because it's about celebration, I wanted to start a little bit with a little bit of a history background, no? And I want you to reflect yourself. Like, do you think that early warning systems and anticipatory action, like, when did we start to work on this? Like, what do you think? Like, write even in the chat, some ideas. Like, was this like 10 years ago? Was this like 20 years ago? Or beyond? So put some ideas in the chat. What do you think it is? So while you write, I'm going to start. So the reality is that we have been doing early warning systems for centuries, obviously, but let's say in modern times, we could say that over the last 40 years, we have been like really strong on setting up really that concept of how to use forecasts much better, how to be able to act before a disaster. So over these last 40 years that actually started because big disasters happened, particularly some of you might remember Cyclone Bola in Bangladesh was a very important one that kind of make us kind of realize that, okay, we need to do something. We need to do much better on acting ahead of disasters. So over the last 40 years, there have been many important milestones. Like we have, for instance, the Sendai framework, which is amazing. And it includes really that idea of like for governments to have the very strong early warning systems. Part of the history really brings the idea or the growth of the concept of anticipatory action. And it's quite a special thing because I don't know if all of you know it, but basically there was a moment of time in which some people, amazing people in the humanitarian sector, started to think of like, okay, how can we do to be able to use weather forecast in a better way? Like, how can we make sure that early warning systems actually work in a much better way? So through that process in the humanitarian sector, there was a realization that there were like three important things that were missing of the early warning system process. And it was this idea of like having a financing mechanism that could enable actually to be able to do the early actions, to have a decision-making process that was sharper, like really like what we call now a trigger mechanism that could enable actually the actions knowing an ad hoc base, but like really with a very sharp decision-making process, and also a much better plan that would allow us really to do early actions. So that was a beautiful process that started in the humanitarian sector, like around 2008. And since then, we could argue that over the last decade, I mean, the humanitarian sector has been transformed in a way. Like it's incredible. Like in many of us, there is this idea of like, yes, I mean, there is like there is a big sense of us to be able to anticipate disaster, to be able to anticipate crisis, and not only kind of responding. So I think this is something very important for us to acknowledge, that we come from that long history of early warning systems, then anticipatory action kind of emerged in the humanitarian sector. But now we're in a moment of time where we are kind of like converging in a way. Like there is this big acceptance that those principles of anticipatory action, the financing, the triggering, the really sharp action planning, should be part of everything, like not only of the humanitarian sector, that should be really part of all kind of governmental like processes. So, of course, this is very good to acknowledge that history and the progress, but we have many challenges still ahead, like a lot. So one of those is that in a way, there is still a separation between that idea of like early warning systems from one side and then anticipatory action from one side. But we need to recognize that it's just part of the same equation. So I think there is a need of like consolidating, or like really of like kind of starting to kind of talk about this joint language. Now, there is a big challenge is that at the end, we need every single government to have a functional early warning system with anticipatory action principles within that. No, so that's still a massive challenge. And that's the ideal scenario. We want that in the world, like to make sure that the governments have that. But we also need to acknowledge that it's very complex in many places. And that's why the role of the humanitarian sector of really being really good at having these anticipatory action mechanisms is so important. And this is particularly important for fragile and conflict affected contexts, because it is the humanitarian actors that are able to work with the governments, work with other actors to really support this process of early warning and early action, even in the most conflict, or most complex places. So there is a lot of work that is still needs to be done to be able to do that. So we have brilliant examples, but there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. Then the third challenge that we see is that there is a lot of fragmentation still, because in a way, we're very lucky that this topic is becoming a big priority. Like this is something that we wanted, 10, 20 years ago, but that also creates fragmentation. So we have like different financial flows, we have investments from different parts, we have like a lot of excitement, different type of research, we have pilots, we have so many things going on. So that creates in a way fragmentation. So that's a massive challenge that we are facing. So what do we need to do? So I propose there are many things we can do, but I propose like tricky things for all of us and also to reflect through this webinar. So like one is that acknowledgement of history. Like we need to understand we come from 40 years of evolution. This is not anticipatory action per se. It's not just a new thing that, just emerged, no, we're talking about a really long-term process to get where we are. And we need to learn all these lessons from the past. We need a very strong humanitarian sector that is really able to integrate that anticipatory action kind of culture within the work that we're doing. So we have progressed a lot. We have financing mechanisms at the UN system, within the Red Cross, within the NGOs, but there is still a lot of work to do. And I'm imagining that many of you here are very interested to really understand how to integrate that within the work of your organizations, your NGOs, all the work that you are doing. So there's a lot of work, but there is a lot of kind of really good kind of lessons and ideas. Like Karen later is going to tell you the amazing work that the anticipation has been doing to really have that knowledge brokering to help this ecosystem. And I think another thing that we need to really keep in mind is that we need to continue working with governments, not to make sure that a lot of this work that we're doing in the humanitarian sector also connects with that long-term vision of governments having a very strong early warning system with anticipatory action principles as a united thing, not as a separated thing. Like it's part of the same kind of package. So our role in the humanitarian sector is also developing our own capacities and making sure that we are really good at that, but working alongside the governments with the different capacities, understanding, of course, that there is a lot of complexities. And the last thing, which relates to a lot of the work of the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, is that we are in a really good moment of time of all of us being in the same page, of really bringing the policy messaging, like the changes that we want to do, but as a collective, not individually, but like really how do we bring together, all those changes that we want to see from a policy perspective, from a financing perspective as a collective. With that, I will pass over back to Natasha. keen
Thanks.
to have any
Yeah.
discussions afterwards.
Catalina, thanks for setting the tone for today's webinar. And I think excitement with a real recognition of the work ahead is exactly right. And I think one of the great ways we can do that is indeed by bringing the people together that we have today to learn from each other and with each other. And I would like to hand over now to Karen Dahl from the Anticipation Hub, who will also offer some reflections and framing as we move into today's session. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Natasha, and thanks, Catalina, and thank you to colleagues from the Climate and Environment Charter and REAP for bringing us together today here. Yeah, Catalina has set out why early warning systems and anticipatory action matter for humanitarian organizations. And I would actually like to build on that by asking a very practical question. So, what does it actually take to turn early warning into early and anticipatory action, especially in complex crises? So at the Anticipation Hub, this is a question we explore every day with practitioners, researchers, governments, humanitarian organizations, local actors, and donors around the world. So we really try to bring everyone together. And we are seeing the real momentum. So at the end of May in Geneva, the Anticipation Hub will launch the fourth edition of our annual Global Overview of Anticipatory Action report. And this report shows that in 2025, there were 146 anticipatory action activations in 54 countries, reaching 9.6 million people directly with almost 120 million US dollars in financing. That's not nothing. And that is also up from 47 activations in 2022. So 146 in 25, 47 in 22. So as we can see, this is no longer a small pilot agenda, but it is becoming part of how humanitarian organizations, governments, and communities manage predictable risks. But the report also shows that anticipatory action does not happen automatically. To move from warning and then to action, three things need to come together: systems, decisions, and finance. So first, anticipatory action needs systems, not standalone projects. So humanitarian organizations already receive many kinds of information, right? So we receive forecasts of floods and droughts and heat waves and cyclones. We get seasonal outlooks. We have food security analysis and community-based early warning. But information alone does not reduce impacts. So the real question is, who receives information, who trusts it, who interprets it, and who is ready to act? And that is why anticipatory action has to connect to existing systems wherever possible. So national disaster risk management systems, hydrometeorological services, local government structures, social protection systems, community-based mechanisms, and humanitarian coordination platforms. So the forthcoming global overview report shows that in 2025, there were 265 active anticipatory action frameworks in 48 countries. When we say framework, we mean more than a plan. So a framework sets out in advance the trigger, so the decision-making process, the actions, the roles, and also the financing, ideally. So this framework basically creates the system that allows organization to act before impacts fully unfold. And then second, anticipatory action requires decisions to be made before the disaster. It asks us basically to agree in advance what risks are we monitoring, so which one do we choose, what trigger will it tell us to act, who decides that, and who also decides what actions will be taken, who will implement them, and how will we know whether they worked. These are not only technical questions, they are also institutional and kind of ethical questions. Are we willing to act when there's uncertainty? What level of confidence is enough for us to act? What happens if we act and the hazard does not materialize? And what happens if we wait and people are harmed? These questions become even more important in complex crises. The Global Overview report shows that in 2025, at least 33 activations took place in fragile conflict and violence affected settings. So anticipatory action is possible in complex crises, but it needs careful design. A flood in a stable context is obviously not the same as a flood affecting displaced people in an insecure area. A drought forecast may interact with markets, livelihood, access constraints, conflict dynamics, and protection risks. And this means that, I mean, decision making must bring together different types of information, whether in climate data, conflict analysis, protection analysis, local knowledge, market monitoring, and humanitarian access information. And it somehow also requires some kind of humility, as we will not always have perfect data and also not perfect models, but we can make better decisions if assumptions, thresholds, roles, and also accountability are clear. And then third, anticipatory action needs finance that is ready before the crisis. So one of the biggest barrier is that funding often arrives too late. We all know that. Organizations may have the warning, the plan, and the partners, but not necessarily the resources to act before impacts escalate. And of course, we also know that anticipatory action works best if financing is ideally pre-agreed, flexible, and trigger-based so that we know when to act. So the Global Overview report gives a clear sense of what's possible. In 2025, active frameworks had more than 280 million US dollars of pre-agreed financing in place. But financing remains obviously a major challenge. Humanitarian funding is under pressure, and anticipatory action still depends heavily on a relatively small group of committed donors and financing mechanisms. So the question is not only how we get the money, it is also how we get better quality money. Funding that is prearranged before the shock, flexible enough to move quickly and able to support both the actions themselves, so the fuel money, and the systems needed to make those actions possible, so the build money. Put simply, money must move at the speed of the risk. So to conclude, anticipatory action is not an additional project sitting behind humanitarian response. It is, as also Catalina said, part of a broader system shift. It helps us move from reacting to predictable crises towards managing crises before they become disasters. It links climate and environmental analysis with humanitarian decision-making, strengthens preparedness, supports communities to act earlier, and challenges our financing system to respond before losses become irreversible. So this is exactly what we do at the Anticipation Hub: make learning visible, connect people and organizations, and help move anticipatory action from promising practice to normal practice. So please come also join the Anticipation Hub in different ways. And I thank you a lot.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks as well for making the case for why anticipatory action is so important right now. And we'll get to sharing some of the amazing opportunities to engage with both REAP and Anticipation Hub later in the call. But now we'll hand over to the first panel series we have for today, which is really our expert panel. It's the case studies, it's learning from those that are working on the ground, supporting and implementing early warning, early action, and anticipatory action. And Nishani will facilitate this panel for us. So over to you.
Thanks so much. Really, thanks for setting the stage from both Catalina and Karen. And this is really crucial to really look at. I really like the systems, decisions, finance, and also the lessons learned. Like these are what we really are here to also hear from our own organizations that are working on the ground. And we've got a really interesting panel today with Mile Organization for Environment Protection. We've got Resurgence and the Malawi Red Cross Society, who's going to share some of their lessons learned and how they have been working on early warning and anticipatory action on the ground. We hope that this inspires you. So first and foremost, I'd like to go to Issam Garib, who's the CEO of Mile Organization for Environment Protection, which is an Iraqi national NGO. I will let you introduce yourself and the organization. But one of the questions I have for you is, we heard about systems, decisions, and finance. And Mile Organization is working to support the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Governorate, on strengthening their early warning systems. Could you share a little bit more about the work you're doing and how this work supports especially impacted communities and humanitarian actors alike? Because you're working to support not just communities and the government, but also humanitarian actors on the ground in terms of early warning, early action. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for the brief. My organization is a local non-profit organization in Iraq. We are just a young organization, registered in 2022. The goal behind registering this organization, because my background is in the humanitarian, is 20 plus. We found in Iraq, especially environment and early warning system, there is a gap transferring this data to actions. So we started with the fragmentation of the data sets. And in Iraq, we know it's heavily impacted with the climate change, with the flooding, with the drought, with the dust storm, and how this will be considered in the early warning system. What we did, we collected, one of the colleagues mentioned historical, what has happened in the past, which is to use it in the future, learn it to reduce the casualty and the loss. In Iraq, we have early warning system. I can say multi-systems we have, but always we are facing the casualty and we are lost. So where is the problem? So that's what we, as a mile organization, we work closely with the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Planning, municipalities, JCC, JCMC, to provide them support in regarding of the information management and try to put the climate change indicators and also historical data, what has been happened. So that's how Mile wanted to fill that gap to reduce the impact. So I will say it's not the early warning system is not fully linked with the actions, and also the multi-sectors was not connected very well. That's why always we have the loss. The goal we wanted to, if you want to have the strong early warning system, you need to make sure that you cross sectors data has been addressed in this system. Yeah. So next slide, please. So what we want in Iraq, we downloaded all data for 22 years, not just the Iraq border, the border of that impact Iraq in the climate change, all this data, and transfer it to the information so can be used about the pollutions in the 22 years, where is the pollutions, where is the source, dust storm, when and where it's coming, the size, drought, how impacted the life, and heat waves, also water changes, which is one of the main issues in Iraq in the recently with the flooding. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some of the examples that was one before. Okay, some of the environmental data that we integrated with the other sectors. One of the sectors we know, some of the countries we have the contamination and the landmines, ERW. Iraq, one of the countries that faced a lot of the wars. So how the early warning system should include the indicators for the landmines. We found with the flooding, based on our data, historical data, which area will be impacted with the flooding, which area was impacted in the past, and what we are expecting with level different scenarios of the raining and the flooding. So we provided some scenarios to the government. I will say we are proud that in the south of Iraq, they took action because in the past, landmines moved from one of the provinces to other provinces with the flooding and during the rainy season, and the unfortunate accidents happened also. But when we put it our historical data with the current contamination, and we advised the government to reconsider for the prioritization for the clearance, and the civil defense teams, they cleared those areas which will be impacted by flooding. One of the successful stories that has been done. And next, please. Yeah, so one of the other things, as we mentioned, how we link with the other clusters. So one of them with the waste management, if you see one of the maps with the black carbon, we did one of the projects with the UNEP, where the black carbon is coming, which is impacting heat waves for the country. So where is the source and which area majority impacted? So We used all the historical data and one divided by the geographical location and by duration to see which area. We know in Iraq, majority is coming from the oil and gas, but also is coming from the waste, burning the organic waste. So that was the things that we wanted to consider with the early warning, which area it's creating more disease and public health has been impacted. Other things that we provided in the COP29 in Baku, it was how the drought impacted the process of the mine action, landmine action, how the landmines in the ground become more dangerous, and how the water changed the path to the unsafe area. So that was the maps and the data that provided as advice to the government and to those that are taking action for the early warning system. Next, please. Yeah, one of the scenarios that 7 months ago, because when you have the data, you can advise. It's not just one information. We want to integrate all the information. We did a search based on this data to see in the last 6 years how many rivers in Iraq converted to dry rivers because of the other countries, they changed the path of the water is coming to Iraq, or because of the drought and the climate change. So we highlighted those rivers, and by accident, I will mention one of the rivers. By accident, those dry rivers has been used for the black water, wastewater, and unfortunately, some chemical waste has been put it on those rivers. But we advised the government, if the raining level this year will increase, maybe those rivers will be mixed with the Tigris for the drinking water, and it will be danger for the environment. So did you consider it in the early warning system? They didn't take any action, and I can show you that river is called Diyala River, and 7 months ago, this year, in the April, there was heavy raining. Unfortunately, if you go to the next slide, with the heavy raining, this rivers become survive, and all the black water, it's mixed with the drinking water, and around 132 kilometers contaminated. Thousands of fish has been dead, and also created a problem with the drinking water. And if you go to the next slide, that's how the companies and some municipalities, they will put the black water or wastewater in that river when it was dead. But the middle one, it will show when after the raining, how it's mixed with the other river, with the drinking water, and the 132 kilometers has been contaminated, and the action was not taken in advance. That's why we have early warning system. We have many fancy system in Iraq, but always we have casualties. So we know there is something missing when you connect all the dots, different data together. If you go to the next slide, please.
Issam, we're at a bit of time, so we'll come back to you during Q&A on some of the aspects that you wanted to share. If you don't mind, as we have a few other speakers. Really interesting to see how climate risk analysis, the data that has really supported early warning, early action to government in terms of looking at mine action, looking at environmental degradation, water being contaminated. And these are really important early warnings that maybe not everybody else has thought of, or they've not been looking at this angle perhaps. So it's really interesting aspect to share. We'll come back to, I'm sure there's a lot of questions for you that we will have next. I would like to go next to Resurgence, and from looking at supporting government on early warning systems and supporting them, Resurgence is looking a little bit more on how you support communities receive some of this early warning for early action. And Mark and Ezra, we both have Mark Harvey, who's the CEO and founder of Resurgence, and Ezra El Ghadi, who's the project manager of Daraja, also of Resurgence. the question to both of you is, we talk about early warning, but then local and traditional knowledge and language is key when translating early warning into early action. And this is something that's really crucial we've seen when it comes to communities on the ground. And early warning mechanisms are as good as how they reach the most vulnerable communities, right? So could you share some examples of how you are working in this particular sector, especially from the Daraja project, and how you're taking them into consideration when you are implementing or sharing early warning messaging, and what are your lessons through this project? Over to you.
Thank you, Nishani. That's a great question. And in order to answer it, I'm going to take us off piste slightly into the environment bit of the charter and answer, I think, Isam's question, is there something missing beyond fancy early warning systems? So for Resurgence, we think that actually acknowledging the endeavor of creating an early warning system is not just about technology, it's not just about modeling forecasting, it's not just about triggers and thresholds. That's incredibly important. But actually, it is also a cultural and social endeavor, and that actually we can learn from natural living systems. And we take note of the fact that where biodiversity is at most pressure is where culture, heritage is under duress, and language extinction is often at play. So we actually take all of that into account in the way we approach our work and Daraja. Next slide, please. Here's a specific example. We have drawn from ecosystem science to create a very practical tool that helps us understand how information flows or does not flow within early warning systems. And there's a history to this. We have been applying this thinking since Cyclone Nargis in 2009. And we have drawn from nature important attributes around complexity and dynamism, and realize that when you're approaching the dissemination function of an early warning system, you need to actually take advantage of the complexity of media producers and actors. And you also need to acknowledge that information itself is not static. It changes in credibility and impact according to the channel through which it's conveyed. So we take a very dynamic approach to an information-based approach to how we approach creating an early warning system. And ultimately, we think that an early warning system is a self-regulating system that has some of the attributes of Earth system science and the Gaia theory. So that sounds all really highly abstract, but and I'd like to sort of now take it into the reality of our work by inviting my colleague Ezra to just outline how she's been working in Sudan, taking those approaches of heritage, culture, and drawing inspiration from nature. Over to you, Ezra.
Thank you, Mark. And I think this is about time to tell the story how Daraja was brought to Sudan. And actually, it started from a small research project.
Next slide, please. Could you go to the next slide? Yeah.
Yes, a small research project in 2022-2023 in Tuti Island, an island in the confluence of the Nile, which has been prone to flooding, actually, every year since the beginning of age. So actually, the community in this island have been dealing with floods as part of their daily lives. And actually, this island has shown resilience to floods So there was a record on that they do have the minimum impacts in terms of loss and damages. And that really led us to study what do they do actually. And they do have this traditional community-led system. They call it Taya, lookout tents around the island, facing different sides of the River Nile, Blue Nile, and White Nile. And they do not only use the traditional knowledge of monitoring the Nile on the river levels and the colors and even the weather itself, but also is a comprehensive system that really shaped the community activities during the rainy season. So this indigenous knowledge with the lookout points in the Nile, and also managed by the local teams to mobilize community action, which we call it in Sudan Nafir, has formed a circle of disaster risk management led by the community in that. And we have done analysis on this heritage, and we have we have a publication on like how to use this experience from the people of Tuti and transfer it to other communities in Sudan. So what we wanted to is to influence this traditional heritage approach to flood mitigation by bringing it under Daraja and strengthen it by linking it with the meteorological services and hydromet information that
Next
comes
slide, please.
from the institutions in Sudan. So, and that really introduced us to create and design the Sudan, Daraja Sudan Emergency and Weather Forecast and Early Warning System. So when we finished the Tuti project, actually it was by during the war when the conflict happened, and we were about to commence full implementation of Daraja in Khartoum. But the war happened, and that really created multiple issues in reaching to the communities in Sudan, the huge disruption in the weather and climate information providers, SMA. There was this fragmentation. So it really was a ground shaker to the early warning systems of Sudan. So
Next slide,
we
please.
designed the service to be a national service that really provide early warning and weather and climate information to the end users, the communities, through linking all the actors together, and those fragmented actors as a result of the war. So this is the result of 14 months working closely with communities, conducting assessment surveys at the baseline and midline, and also engaging all the key stakeholders into that. So this is the baseline. It shows how the information flows from the Met service to the end users. Next slide, please.
Hi, Ezra. We need to wrap up. So if you
Yes.
can maybe go to your conclusions. Thank you.
Yes, and this is how we now the information ecosystem looks like. So now we are approaching several innovations in Sudan. We are trying to bring in AI to provide early warnings in local dialects. So we are exploring generative AI to produce warnings in Sudanese Arabic and Tigray, and we are going to transfer this to Ethiopia and Kenya, looking at national looking at languages like Swahili, Somali, Oromo, and Amharic. So thank you, and we can share the results from the different countries that we are working in, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, and also Sudan. We can share the impact results of how Daraja has been impactful into these in these countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Ezra. I mean, really, that looks a very complex system of information sharing and management, but that I think is what is really what happens on the ground, that is depicting reality and absolutely crucial. And it's really interesting to hear how you're translating early warning into so many different languages using AI. And I know that even my organization, ISAM, and them are also using AI. And we might come back to this perhaps if there are questions to speakers on the use of AI for information management and for early warning dissemination. Our next up, we have Chance Muama from the Malawi Red Cross, and now this one is slightly different. It's more about anticipatory action and how they've been working in Malawi. Chance, maybe if you are you there to? Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Nisha.
Perfect. Thanks, Chance. And maybe to kind of get to looking at some of that anticipatory action work that you've been doing with Malawi Red Cross Society, what are some of those insights and lessons learned on both anticipatory action and financing approaches used by Malawi Red Cross Society in strengthening communities and to face some of these impacts of climate change that you're seeing in the region, but also specifically in Malawi in the work you've been doing? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nisha, and very glad to be part of this webinar. So I'll be very excited just to share some experiences and lessons on the implementation of participatory action for the forecasted flooding, more especially using the information that is generated from various systems at the global as well as national level, which enables to be ready to act before the impact of the disaster occurs to reduce the risk that is associated by most of the communities in the various areas that are prone and risk to disasters. Next, please. So just to give a highlight of the context of Malawi, Malawi is one of the countries which has, of course, very minimal greenhouse emissions, but much that I think the greenhouse emission is low, but it's very vulnerable to climate change. Currently, it's ranked at 184 out of the 186, according to the Notre Dame Index gains. And one of the most hazards that frequently affects Malawi are the hydrometeorological disasters, which mostly align with the droughts as well as heavy rains, which mostly cause flooding as well as landslides, which in most cases causes a lot of loss of lives as well as displacements, damaging to the infrastructure. And according to the current reports, almost 5.7 million were projected to fall under the IPC level 3 with the food insecurity states, which up at the moment was still supporting those vulnerable communities. But now we thought of what can we improve with the information that we have. We have opportunities that at least can be able to do some of the risks. That's why we drove into the opportunities to develop the early action protocols with the information that is generated, that is available, that can be able to put us in a position to act early before the impact of the disaster. So basically, for this information, what we have done is that we did a lot of consultation, we did a lot of engagement with the national level, with the community level, with various districts to ensure that all the systems that we are developing are aligning well with what the communities need, with what the communities want to see that they are really providing about the reduction in terms of the risk pertaining to floods. So our simplified air action protocol is basically focusing on the flood. I think my colleagues, especially Karen, mentioned a lot about the specific hazard that each and every plan has to really target. So for this, we mostly focus on flooding, which is one of the most severe hazard that affects most parts of the countries, which causes a lot of vulnerabilities. So, for instance, like this year, we had various areas which were affected by flooding, and the anticipatory action really supported to alleviate some of the risks that are associated with the vulnerabilities that are faced by most of the communities. So just to take you through how the integration of the early warning system that are provided reaches out or enables a release of finance mechanism to address some of the issues that are about to reduce the impact that are faced by loss of flooding. We go through the activation process where you go next. We mostly focus on the three main areas where we have to gather information that is generated at global level. So we can gather information from either GLOPAS, Global Flood Awareness System, and gather information from ECMFW. And this information, once it has been analyzed, it aligns with our own local contextualized model. So like here, we have our own national weather management system. We normally refer to as the Department of Climate Change, which looks at the alignment with what the global forecasting models are telling, forecasting, and what's the indicators that are showing within the context of our country. And with that, if you press another button, then we have an impact-based forecasting, which indicates where to trigger. So, for example, this is just one of the indicators that depicts which areas are going to be very prone based on the forecasted event of either maybe for rains. So, based on the thresholds, if those thresholds have been met, next. Then we have the simplified area action protocol. So this protocol documents all the three critical elements, which is the triggers, the area actions that are supposed to be undertaken, as well as the financing mechanism that can be activated to support the implementation of the area actions. So based on the parameters and exactly where the areas are going to be affected, we have a trigger statement, which at least is provided by the National Meteorological Department. And this information enables us at least to automatically activate some of the actions based on the impact-based forecasting, which enables us at least to carry some of the prioritized area actions. So with the information that has been provided, we always co-design, co-create with the communities to see what really can lead about or can tailor to reduce the impact of flooding. So, for example, some of the prioritized interventions or actions include the distribution of cash, which can necessitate the communities to evacuate, which can necessitate the communities to support maybe various businesses. But at the same time, as Malawi Red Cross Society, we also work with the volunteers and within the setup of the communities. Once they have received the earnings in terms of what maybe would be the impact, especially the most common one is the damage that is caused to shelter. Then at least the volunteers together with the communities, they do support with the maybe strengthening of the shelter so that they can withstand from the flooding water or from the extent of the rainfalls. Next, please. So from this, I think there have been various lessons that have been implemented. I think my colleague from former speakers already mentioned that developing an anticipated action plan is not just about a plan, but it's just about a plan that has to make sure that it has got all the necessary elements that at least can be implemented and can lead to maybe reduction in terms of an impact that you want to reduce. So from the lessons learned that we have gathered is that at least with the implementation of AA in Malawi, we have seen the strong forecasting capacity because we do engage, they do learn, they do reviews that at least enables us to willingly contribute to the deployment of the triggers. Also, we have the teams that can be deployed effectively in time to support with the implementation. And we have seen coordination. We don't just do it alone, but work with the government to ensure that at least everything that we are doing is also in line with their priorities. So we also have the willingness of the communities that act before the warnings. And also we have seen that the area actions lead to lower mortality and they save more assets. And also the preposition stock are distributed immediately after the impact has been forecasted, before it makes even any further damages. So thank you so much for this presentation.
Thanks, Chance. You are absolutely on time. Thank you so much, and really thank you for taking us through this the early warning messaging, the trigger activation, and then actually working with the communities to really design your response to them and the anticipatory action mechanisms that are used. This might be quite a lot of jargon to a few other organizations. Sometimes it is to me. I'm also learning a lot, but I think we have a few other speakers coming up. So I'm going to hand over to Natasha to look at our next session, which is going to look at the resources and financing piece. And we have time to come back to the speakers for question and answers, and I'm sure you have quite a lot of them. Please do share it in the chat, and we will come back to you on those questions. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you. We're now moving on to the resources panel of the webinar, which is an exciting piece of the conversation, especially after hearing about some of the incredible work. For organizations that are just getting started, there's probably questions about, okay, how do we do this ourselves? And just, to put it in context of why we're doing this as the Charter Secretariat, we were established essentially to be a support hub for the sector to connect to expertise, to tools, to resources, to advance climate and environmental action, whether it's through webinars like this or through one-on-one support. And since we launched 2 years ago, we've been working to map the tools and resources and expertise that already exists and try to make that available to signatories. So we've been curating these resources on the Charter Guidance platform, now with 7 thematic pages, and the latest page and the precipice for this webinar is the early warning and anticipatory action page. The QR code will take you to this page, and you can see here we've posted over 60 resources organized into these different categories here. It's available in Spanish, French, Arabic, and English. And there are a number of tools, trainings, technical guides, engagement opportunities, and also importantly, case studies like what we heard today. I just want to flag some examples of what's out there. Firstly, we have a number of introductory resources for organizations looking to build some foundations on early warning, early action, and anticipatory action. One such example is this glossary of terms. I know for me, I found this guide incredibly insightful to help me understand all of the different terminology that's being used. And this one was published by REAP a few years ago with ADAPT. And just to say, the Getting Started section also offers an overview of all of REAP and Anticipation Hub's resources. They themselves are their own resource hubs and have many guides, engagement opportunities, and tools that might be useful for your organization. So we've referred to these resources throughout the guidance page. There are also a number of learning opportunities. One example is this 2-part online course from the CARE Climate Justice Center, which explains not just the components of anticipatory action and its role in the disaster management cycle, but also how to do this with a gender responsive approach. From the section on engagement opportunities, here you can see the amazing work of REAP and Anticipation Hub. They both have a number of working groups for its members, such as in the Anticipation Hub, they have a working group on locally led AA and risk financing. REAP has a working group specifically dedicated to an essential piece of early warning, which is on risk communication. And there are a number of other communities of practice and working groups in this section as well. We also have included a number of technical guides that take you a further step into deepening your knowledge on AA. This guide, for example, is developed by Welthungerhilfe, supports organizations in conflict and displacement settings in navigating some of the complexities around AA. I really love this flowchart, which provides some quick questions on how you can consider an approach to AA in these contexts. There are also a number of practical instruments and tools, such as what Chance mentioned, how to have the data you need on climate risk that can help inform some of these early warning and anticipatory action systems. We do have an entire guidance page dedicated on climate and environment data, which you can access on that QR code in the top corner. But here's just one example. It's the Google Flood Hub, which provides flood data and flood forecasts up to 7 days in advance. It's using Google's AI models as well as some global data sources, and as an interesting tool that's emerged in the space. And lastly, we have a number of case studies as well that you can refer to, including some dedicated platforms that already collect and share lessons learned and best practice, such as the Anticipation Hub's case study platform as well, which you can filter and sort through. And we have individual case studies as well. I've included here a snapshot of IFRC's and Cruz's collection of early warning system case studies, largely from national societies. And just to flag, because of the nature of this webinar, I wanted to highlight one more resource we have put together. It's a curation of a wide range of tools and resources related more broadly to climate adaptation and resilience programming, but specifically in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And there are a number of resources like that guide I showed you of from Welthungerhilfe that are specifically designed for AA and early warning, early action in these contexts. And you can access this as well through our tools and resources platform and the QR code on the screen. And lastly, before I hand over to Gavin, we have just a number of examples that I've shown you now, but please do check out the guidance page to see what else might be useful to you in your organization. To note that we are constantly updating these guidance pages. So if you have something to share, whether it's a case study or a tool or resource related to these themes, you can email us or fill in the form that I'll drop into the chat in a moment, but you can also access the QR code. And we'd love to share your resources and learnings, including especially if it's in other languages. So that's all for me, and I'll hand over to, I believe, Gavin to talk to walk us through the financing piece of this session and introduce our speakers there.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. That was a very comprehensive overview. I really recommend everyone to go and do a deep dive in all these resources. Hopefully, you'll share them with the readouts or some kind of because there's a lot of information. I see people desperately trying to click on all those links to get all that information. So it's all available on the Climate Environment Charter page. I can go to there and then deep dive, but there's a lot of links. So moving on quickly to the finance part, I'm very honored to be able to introduce LK Makasilas from CRUISE. CRUISE is the Climate Risk and Early Warning System Initiative. It's a financial operational mechanism to support least developed countries and small island developing states. And I think there are many listeners here who come from those countries, so they'll be interested about this work. And CRUISE increases availability and accessibility of early warning systems to allow communities to respond to climate-related hazards. LK, I just want to start maybe this discussion just to ask you about the operational procedures that CRUISE produce specifically on fragile conflicts and violence settings. So I was wondering whether maybe you have some suggestions about what kind of opportunities those operational procedures provide and the partnerships that CRUISE is supporting, especially for humanitarian actors, right? This is really an audience with a lot of humanitarian actors, and a lot of them are working with hard-to-reach communities, and I know that that's a lot of the work that CRUISE finances. So LK, over to you to give us a bit of an overview of that.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I'm equally honored to be introduced by you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to more than 100 participants joining us in this webinar. Thanks to the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations, of course, REAP, our partners, and from Anticipation Hub as well. Gavin already introduced a little bit about the cruise initiative. So just to reiterate that we fund life-saving climate action, and we help the world's most vulnerable countries and territories to build early warning systems against hazards such as floods and droughts and others to strengthen their resilience to climate shocks. And cruise was launched in 2015, so we've been operational for more than a decade now. To respond to your question, Gavin, in the next slide, while we all know that early warning systems are absolutely essential for protecting lives and people living in fragile conflict and violence affected settings are frequently left behind, and they face a significant gap in early warning systems and climate finance. So as in Cruz, we developed in 2025 under the guidance of Dr. Catalina Jaime and reflecting also the experiences of our implementing partners, the WMO, World Bank, and the UNDRR. These operational procedures on programming in FCVs integrate these specific considerations in FCV settings into every stage of project development and implementation. Next slide, please. So our commitment in Cruz, we remain focused on enhancing early warning delivery in the world's most vulnerable countries, specifically least developed countries and small island developing states. And we are currently active in 23 countries categorized as FCV by the World Bank. These new procedures that I have mentioned, this provide a framework to ensure that early warning system investments are truly FCV sensitive by accounting for institutional fragility, contested territories, and the realities of protracted conflict. And we achieve this through several innovative funding mechanisms. First, we make sure that FCV status is a primary factor in determining strategic pipeline allocations for crews to ensure that our funds, our investments reach the highest risk areas. Additionally, we have a small grants window we call the Accelerated Support Window, or ASW. This window provides dedicated funds for FCV sensitive project design and rapid context analysis, which is, as we all know, very vital for maintaining continuity in volatile conditions. We also encourage our implementing partners to include in their project budgets flexible in-country funds and contingency budget lines to allow for the rapid protection of equipment and data during crisis, so that critical infrastructure, especially those for early warning systems, are not lost when it is most needed. Now, in the next slide, beyond just finance, these FCV operational procedures matter deeply to humanitarian organizations because they help align investments with other financing mechanisms through a nexus alignment that fosters greater collaboration and sustainability. And these procedures also provide a risk appetite framework, helping humanitarian partners to remain in operation even when security or political complexity escalates. Further, in our operational procedures, we also explicitly note the need to prioritize reaching the last mile, including internally displaced people and refugees, who are often the primary focus of humanitarian aid. What are the opportunities for collaboration and partnerships? In the next slide, we've identified 4 potential opportunities available. First, of course, tactical partnerships. So our cruise implementing partners are encouraged to establish agreements with agencies that have unique access to hard-reach communities. For example, we've just approved as an accelerated support window for Myanmar, which will pilot a flood forecasting framework in Tachilek, and WMO, which is leading. This action will work with NGOs that have access to the agricultural community and farmers, as well as non-state actors who can facilitate on-the-ground implementation. Secondly, of course, is joint programming with humanitarian organizations engaged in anticipatory action, and also working with peace and development actors to translate Nexus policies into concrete early warning system activities. Conflict foresight is also an area for collaboration, with opportunities to collaborate with emerging foresight networks to monitor risk, and of course, this collaboration with the international humanitarian law actors to advocate for protection of critical early warning system infrastructure, especially during armed conflict. So in the next slide, as you see, our core part of our strategy in hard-to-reach areas is strengthening local actors and also faith-based organizations who often maintain the trust and local knowledge required to operate in areas, especially those controlled by non-state armed groups. And by focusing on the inclusion of vulnerable groups through co-produced mechanisms and technological innovation, we ensure that early warning leads to effective early action on the ground. And finally, our approach includes dedicated post-crisis planning to ensure that systems are rebuilt even stronger after a disaster has occurred. And this vital work, of course, is only possible through the grateful support of the 12 member countries of CRUISE, contributing to the trust fund, including France, Germany, UK, Finland, Switzerland, Canada, among others, and alongside groups like IOSIS for the SIDS and the Least Developed Countries Group. So in closing, I just want to say that addressing the climate finance gap in fragile states is a humanitarian imperative, and by implementing this new CRUISE programming and FCV procedures, we are building the systems that are as resilient as the people they are designed to protect. So thank you for your time, and I encourage you to visit our website and engage with us in our social platforms. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, LK. And as LK mentioned, there are a lot of other resources and other operational procedures on the CRUISE website. So please have a look. It's another good repository. I know we're a little tight on time, so I'll go straight to the next presentation, which is looking at a slightly different perspective. This is an NGO funding network, START Network. It's a collaborative initiative that includes a range of humanitarian agencies. It looks at international organizations, local NGOs, and it connects people in crises. And we have, I believe, two speakers. David Peters is the Crisis Financing Training and Capacity Strengthening Advisor with START Network. And maybe is Tariro Mugoni also going to be able to join? She is the Country Crisis Financing Advisor in Zimbabwe. So really looking at that national perspective over. Over to you, David.
Thanks so much, Gavin, and hi, everyone. So we have some slides to share. The first one is just an introduction to START Network. If you're not familiar, we are a network of 148 NGOs, and this is growing all the time, every year. 73% of our membership is now local and national organizations. Maybe as we're one of the last speakers, to check everyone's still with us, could you react, maybe give us a thumbs up if you are a member of START Network or you're a partner of one of our members? It would be great to see who is here. All right, cool. At least one person's listening. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, good. Nice to see you guys. For everyone else, this is who we are. The organizations on the right, maybe you're more familiar with. This is a selection of some of those original INGO members that we had, but more and more, as I said, we're expanding to introduce organizations from along the bottom: India, Bangladesh, Palestine, Somalia, and a little bit of a spotlight today on Zimbabwe and one of our members there, Nutrition Action Zimbabwe. So on the next slide, I'll introduce one of our first funding mechanisms, which is called the START Fund. This was set up in 2014, and it was really as a fund to go to the areas that were being overlooked. They weren't being supported by the DREF or the SURF. They were small to medium scale crises that were underfunded. But in 2016, we introduced this anticipation window. So the members could submit an alert, as we call it, and they could request funds for anticipatory action. I think the unique thing about this is it doesn't really need one of those formal triggers that we've heard about today. It can be a case of, there's this forecast information, I'm looking at this vulnerability data, there's these people exposed, we put it all together, and our members would submit that. A panel from the members would review that note, and they would determine if it meets some specific criteria and if they would release funds. And that whole process would lead us to funding projects for anticipatory action in 72 hours. And we're not so strict with this. It's quite flexible, and often some of these actions do cross over between anticipation and early responses. And on the next slide, we just have a quick summary of some of the historical alerts. So in the last around 10 years, 123 of these crises have been worked on in anticipation across 51 countries. But maybe to pass to Tarira now, we're going to spotlight on one of those projects in Zimbabwe. So on the next slide, and over to you.
So most recently in Zimbabwe, we had an alert that was done in January of 2026 in anticipation of disease outbreak following a forecast for flooding during the rainy season. We managed to release £350,000, which reached to 70,662 people in districts that were targeted to have poor wash infrastructure, poor health facilities, and a history of waterborne disease outbreaks. So the activities that we had there were wash risk information being shared, water point rehabilitation, and also strengthening of communities' capacity to respond, to prepare for disease outbreaks. Thank you. Next slide.
Thanks, Tariro. So this is one example from the Start Fund, but over the years, as we said, it's been going 10 years. So 5-6 years ago, we started to realize that there was many anticipation alerts for climate hazards coming year after year. There's these recurring crises. So we said, let's start thinking about and developing some of these AA frameworks that we've heard about a bit today, where we do actually do a formalized model development, and there's a really clear trigger and there's a threshold. We do pre-plan as much as possible in consultation, collaboration with communities who are at risk of these crises. And then we do pre-position the funds in advance. So these more formalized, and I guess you could say more traditional AA systems were set up. And on the next slide, in our 5th year now, we pulled together and set up another fund called Start Ready. On the 1st of May, so very soon, this risk pool number 5 will be live across 10 countries for 17 of these frameworks. So you can see the different hazards that we're covering alongside the country names. And one unique part about Start Ready is we actually allocate to these countries and these hazard AA protocols more funds than we hold in the bank, because looking at the probability, they're not all going to happen in 1 year. So we have this risk pooling where we can allocate more than we actually hold. On the next slide is a very quick summary of Start Ready to date. We funded 45 projects and reached over 1 million people. But again, let me pass back to Tariro for a spotlight on what happened in Zimbabwe. Thanks.
So in Zimbabwe, under Start Ready, we managed to pre-position £800,000 in the 2024-2025 agricultural season, and we managed to get a trigger in August of 2024 using the WFP scientific trigger model. We also managed to put aside for our members £60,000 in National Reserve, which were used for operational readiness. And we reached to 76,239 people across 3 districts. So you will see the anticipatory actions that were implemented were around WASH, where water points were deepened and rehabilitated for piped water schemes. We had some poverty deaths prevented through supplementary feeding of cattle, goats, and also distribution of drought tolerant varieties of seeds.
Thanks so much, Tariro, and thanks a lot. And on the next slide, we just wanted to say, obviously, we've spoken a lot today about early warning systems, acting earlier, acting in anticipation, but I don't think we're saying it's going to meet every need, and there's never going to be a need for some humanitarian responses. In some cases, we've tried to think about how we can get financing organized in advance for all of these recurring climate hazards, and we've taken out macro insurance policies linked to the Africa Risk Capacity, or the ARC replica program, in these 4 highlighted countries. And these really are for like an earlier response. We know there's a drought has happened, the funding is released, and then we can try to take action. Quick pass back to Teruru for a spotlight on what happened in Zimbabwe as well with this instrument. On the next slide, please. Thanks.
So in Zimbabwe, through the ARC Sovereign Microinsurance product, we managed to, through a premium of 1.5 million, we got a payout in the 2023-2024 El Nino season of 8.9 million. This was disbursed through the members, where we managed to give to the communities that were in need, and to vulnerable members of the community, the disabled, the elderly, children with acute and chronic malnutrition. We reached to 188,449 people between August and October of 2024. I think you can see the smiles from from the pictures. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Teruru. And maybe just to finalize our points, I think what we've really learned with these different approaches and instruments is that we really want to promote flexibility. We don't necessarily think like very rigid structures and very rigid models and forecast information has worked so well, especially as we look forward and things are getting more complex, crises are compounding altogether. We want to be flexible. We want to really enable things like in start fund anticipation, where our members can look at all of the different risk information in front of them, pull it together and release funding. But of course, like everybody here, funding is short. In the start fund, we've just recently had to cap the alerts. Tereri spoke about a £350,000 one. Now it's 200,000. So more funding for these pooled funds is really needed. I think we're going to close there, but thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Atorio. It was really amazing. I like that connection between the global approach and the national application. I think it's a great model to use that for the future. And I'll hand over, but I think we do have a bit of a participatory segment. Do we still have time for a Menti? Turning over to the organizers. Karen, can you run us through a Menti now?
Yes, I'm happy to. I will share my screen while I think you will have a link to the Menti in the chat, which should be popping up now, I hope.
And this is really just meant to give you, the participants, a chance to kind of chip in on everything you've heard so far. And it's some very simple questions looking at early warning anticipatory action, the journey, and so forth. Where do you stand on that? So please go to that QR code. Thank you, Karen. I see you have it up and running now. That's great. I think you can scan that code. Over to you, Karen.
Why I don't see. No, I think now responses are popping up. So yes, so the first question is, where's your organization in its early warning and AA journey? So you can see like, now once you submit, we can see where you are. And there's like these small bubbles that will connect. So some people are exploring, learning about anticipatory action and early warning. Some are implementing. Super. We won't stand long. We just wanted to get a first sense of what's happening. So we have scaling and institutionalizing early warning and anticipatory action. Great. And implementing as well. Okay, let me move to the next slide, and you are welcome to go in there as well. So what are the biggest barriers to advancing early warning and anticipatory action in your work? So you can be very bold, right? Come up with your barriers, what you think is currently challenging in your work when it comes to anticipatory action and early warning. Okay, funding. Yes, we have discussed that today. Coordination between stakeholders. Yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have I'm talking about anticipatory action, right? We have lots of cases where we build several triggers and several models in the same country, and we are wondering why. But this is still very much happening. So yes, funding. I see a lot of funding. capture funding. It's a lot of shifting the mindset. Yes, I agree. I think that is also still something that we are, yeah, that is still difficult for people to get. Also, when, I mean, from my experience, when working on AA plans, I often still see that people are proposing actions that are classic response actions, which of course sometimes can happen before, but yeah, that, you know, this idea of let's act in advance is sometimes really difficult then to implement. What else do I see? Speaking the same language, I'm moving. Yeah, okay. Lacking expertise, coordination, technology limitations. I would be interested to know that. I mean, of course, I think that's also a bit of a gap, right? There, or like a tricky part that sometimes anticipatory action and early warning comes very, like, it looks very technical. And people talk about triggers and models and whatnot. So I agree. That's great. We have a long list of things that people are looking out for. Let me move to the last slide. I'm just saying that your comments are not lost. We will take them up later. I will skip the voting and go to the next slide. What support would help you start or advance early warning and anticipatory action? So now, I mean, we have representatives from REAP and also the Anticipation up here and other partners, crews. So what support would help you start or advance early warning and anticipatory action? Yes, expertise, funding and collaboration, government buy-in. Difficult sometimes to get from from an organization like us. Yes, I think the unified reliable database is also a very good one. We had a trigger database on the Anticipation Hub, which is also very difficult to fill because in order for everyone to submit timely and have that running. Yeah, technology. So there's lots of stuff coming up, still popping up, and funding is the recurrent issue. Great, let it come. I will leave that one a bit open. And then I will stop sharing, but you can still input on the last slide, and then I will hand it back to Nishani.
Thank you. Could not find my unmute button. Thanks so much. I mean, we've got so much of interesting information, of lessons learned, and input from so many organizations who've shared. And also thanks to all the speakers who were here today to share also what you've been working on, but also what are some of those challenges you've been facing. We haven't been able to go through everything we wanted to on this webinar. That happens because it's always a short time frame. But one of the things, there is some questions on the chat, and specifically David and Tariro, maybe there are people who are asking, how do you join the START network, for example? Other organizations asking, how do we access some of this financing at country level through partnerships from crews? We have also some questions about data and others. So we hope we can try and see if we can share some of those responses to you on our website after we finish, and in the coming weeks with the recording. For the moment, I'm going to share now, hand over to both Catalina and Karen to give a little bit of feedback on what we take forward from this webinar and to where and how. So I see Karen first. So Karen, over to you first.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you, Nishani, and thanks to all speakers and participants for this discussion. I think we really moved from this, framing and then different case studies, very different ones, which I very much like, the financing discussions, and now we had the Menti inputs. I think for me it's very clear it's early warning and anticipatory action are, it's not only a technical agenda. I mean, it sometimes feels a lot like it, but it's not at the end of the day. It's really about, the systems, the partnerships, the decisions and resources coming together. And I mean, this is what you have done, bringing together all these resources and all these people today. I think for the Anticipation Hub, the next step is also to keep supporting this learning journey. So we invite you all to explore the hub's resources and join upcoming webinars and so on. But I would also like to say, that's what I said earlier, right? That the suggestions from the Menti, we take them with us, and yeah, we could discuss what you would need and what the barriers are. We can take that and with you discuss this at for example, the Global Dialogue platform this year, or in another policy forum where it might fit. So we'll come back to that. Yeah, and I think that's it from my side. I mean, the more we discuss, the more we learn it from each other, the better we are getting and saving lives and livelihoods.
Thanks. Maybe you can share perhaps a email or website to where they could connect with some of these working groups that you have. It's in our resources page, but just so also very clear for organizations to join you. Over to you, Catalina.
Thank you, Nishani. When the Climate and Environmental Charter was created, it was a very symbolic kind of commitment of the humanitarian sector to say, like, we have a role on the climate crisis. We have a role on supporting communities to reduce risks. In a way, early warning systems and anticipatory action is one of the very concrete, specific activities that a humanitarian organization can do to really kind of fulfill the commitments of the charter. So I think this webinar is actually quite important because it really shows you that this is nothing new. This is part of that evolution. We have learned so much. There is so much out there that can be implemented by any type of humanitarian organization. And I think we are at the critical moment of doing that. So we, in a way, kind of like, we know the formula. So this is, we have different approaches. It's about how to adapt that to the context of the different organizations and how to connect that with your regular kind of programming. And it is kind of, in a way, more important than ever, because in the middle of this financing crisis that, we have in the world, like particularly in the humanitarian sector, growing risk, not only because of climate change, but like conflicts and so on. This is the moment of like really rethink on how do we do collaborations, how do we actually, learn from what we have implemented, and in a way kind of change the way how we're working. So the invitation is really to kind of take a lot of these ideas that you got from the amazing different presentations that we had today with a lot of the tools and really kind of think, okay, what does this mean for my institution? What does this mean for my work? And how should I connect the dots with all these different initiatives that are happening? And in a way, really not to think about this work as, of course, just as a humanitarian kind of process, but it is connected on the bigger picture of the development efforts, the climate efforts, and also all part of the picture. So thank you so much, Nishani and Natasha, for kind of really leading this. I think this is brilliant, and we need to continue doing more of this. If there is an appetite for this, please reach out. I think Nishani and Natasha will be very keen to continue doing this. So thank you so much to Karen as well, and to all the presenters. It was really, really, really nice to see all the different presentations.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Catalina. And I think just to piggyback on what you said, as the Charter Secretariat and the Charter, we bring so many different actors together. Most of you on this call who shared, presented on the work you're doing in country level, at regional level, are actually charter signatories. And then we have partners like REAP and Anticipation Hub. We bring all of this network together, and we're happy to continue doing that, also to take forward some of the issues and challenges and barriers that you have shared with us forward to at different fora that we are representing, and your voices at those different fora. So we make sure that these are highlighted at these spaces, at the global platforms, and through our advocacy work. And at the same time, we're also hoping that with REAP and Anticipation Hub, we can further strengthen some of these linkages between government, NGOs, civil society, and the multitude of actors working at country level, because those are the ones who are really serving communities. So how do we make sure that those actors are actually feeding in, but at the same time strengthened and have the capacity to respond to these emerging needs that we're seeing on the ground due to climate change and environmental impacts that we're seeing? So thanks to all the speakers and everybody. This is really useful. I learned a lot today, and we hope to see you in one of our future events as well. Thanks a lot. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.